Welcome to our deep dive, into the life and thought of this guy, Archytas of Tarentum. You're into philosophy, and you want to know more about this guy, like you said, combined philosophical inquiry with serious political power and mathematical breakthroughs.
Yeah.
That's a great way to sum up.
Yeah.
We're going to be drawing primarily from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on Archytas
Right.
to unpack just what made him so unique. What stands out to me is that he was so much more than a Pythagorean.
Yeah.
He actually challenged some of their core ideas,
Yeah.
and even seems to have debated with Plato himself.
That's right. He's considered the last major figure of early Pythagoreanism.
Oh, wow.
He was steeped in the Pythagorean tradition,
Yeah.
but also was willing to push its boundaries.
So fascinating to think about how someone deeply embedded in a school of thought can also be the one to get to challenge and expand it.
Right.
It speaks to his intellectual independence. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves,
Sure.
let's establish his place in the lineage of philosophical thought.
We believe Archytas was a student of Philolaus, a key figure in Pythagoreanism,
Okay.
and later went on to teach Eudoxus, the renowned mathematician.
Okay.
This places him right in the heart of a vibrant period of intellectual development.
It seems like he was at the center of a real explosion of ideas,
Absolutely.
almost like a bridge between different generations of thinkers. But I find it most remarkable that Archytas wasn't just an academic, he held immense political power as well.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
He was elected general of Tarentum 7 times in a row,
7 times.
a feat practically unheard of in most Greek city-states.
That's incredible. What made him such a successful leader?
It certainly speaks to his charisma and political acumen.
Yeah.
And remember, Tarentum wasn't some insignificant outpost.
Right.
It was a major power in southern Italy, rivaling even Athens in its influence and wealth.
It's interesting that Tarentum was a democracy, especially considering that many Greek city-states were ruled by oligarchies or even tyrants.
The democratic system in Tarentum was likely due to a historical event. Generations earlier, there was a brutal massacre of the aristocracy,
Wow.
which paved the way for a more egalitarian system.
Okay.
This is important because it likely shaped Archytas' own political philosophy.
That's a really interesting point. So we have this philosopher king,
Yeah.
a brilliant mind,
Right.
military strategist,
Yeah.
and a popular leader in a democratic city-state.
Yeah.
This makes his relationship with Plato all the more intriguing.
Absolutely.
He's famous for rescuing Plato from a tyrant, but their connection goes much deeper than that.
Yes, the Plato connection is complex.
Yeah.
Sources offer conflicting accounts.
Okay.
Some claim Archytas was Plato's teacher.
Okay.
Others suggest it was the other way around. It's a bit of a puzzle.
Right.
The 7th letter, even if it wasn't written by Plato himself,
Right.
offers a fascinating glimpse into their dynamic. It suggests that Archytas,
Okay.
while brilliant,
Yeah.
may not have fully grasped what Plato considered true philosophy.
What an intriguing possibility.
Right.
Almost like there was a philosophical rivalry between them.
Yeah.
What leads you to that interpretation?
It's subtle,
Okay.
but the 7th letter hints at a difference in their approaches to philosophical inquiry.
Yeah.
It suggests that while Archytas excelled in areas like mathematics and politics,
Okay.
he may not have delved into the metaphysical depths that Plato valued.
That raises some really interesting questions about what constituted philosophy in ancient Greece.
Yeah,
Were there different schools of thought on what it meant to be a philosopher?
absolutely.
Interesting.
And this difference in perspective becomes even clearer when we look at Archytas' mathematical achievements.
Okay.
Specifically, his solution to the Delian problem, the problem of doubling the volume of a cube.
I remember hearing about that. Didn't it involve some plague-stricken people consulting an oracle? Tell me
Yeah.
more about the problem itself.
The story goes that the people of Delos were suffering from a devastating plague. The oracle told them they needed to double the size of the cubic altar to Apollo to appease the god.
Oh, okay.
The problem was they couldn't simply build a second identical altar.
Right.
They needed to double the volume while maintaining the cubic shape.
That sounds like a real head-scratcher.
Yeah.
It seems like they needed a mathematician more than an oracle.
And that's where Archytas comes in.
Right.
He solved it brilliantly, using a complex solution involving intersecting three-dimensional shapes, a semicircle, a triangle,
Oh, wow.
all rotating on a cylinder.
I can barely visualize that.
Yeah.
It sounds incredibly complex.
It's pretty amazing.
Did he have any practical applications in mind for this solution, or was it purely theoretical?
It's difficult to say for certain. There's a long-standing debate about whether Plato might have criticized Archytas for using what were considered mechanical methods to solve this problem,
Okay.
implying that it wasn't a pure geometrical solution.
Ah, so this might be another point of contention between them.
Yeah.
Plato, the idealist,
Yeah.
versus Archytas, the pragmatist, who wasn't afraid to kind of get his hands dirty, so to speak.
It's a compelling theory,
Yeah.
but it's important to note that the earliest source, Eratosthenes, actually praises Archytas' solution for being a pure geometrical demonstration.
Okay. So maybe Plato wasn't throwing shade after all.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be this underlying tension between their approaches to knowledge and how it should be pursued.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
And this tension resurfaces when we look at Archytas' work on harmonics,
Okay.
the study of musical intervals and their mathematical ratios.
Yeah.
This was a central theme in Pythagorean thought.
Right, the famous music of the spheres concept.
Exactly.
I find it fascinating that the ancient Greeks saw such a strong connection between music and mathematics.
They believed that mathematical ratios and harmonies underpinned everything, from the movement of the planets to the structure of music itself.
Wow.
And Archytas made some significant contributions to this field.
He wasn't just theorizing about music, though. He was actually analyzing the music played by real musicians, wasn't he?
That's what's so remarkable about his approach.
Yeah.
He grounded his mathematical ratios in the sounds and tunings used in actual musical practice.
Okay.
He wanted to understand how music worked in the real world, not just in some abstract theoretical realm.
This seems to contrast with Plato's emphasis on ideal forms.
Right.
Did this practical approach put him at odds with Plato's philosophy?
It's possible.
Okay.
Plato, remember, was more interested in the ideal, abstract world of forms.
Yeah.
Archytas, on the other hand, was deeply engaged with the concrete realities of music making.
So in a way, Archytas was bridging the gap between theory and practice,
Yeah.
something you mentioned at the beginning of our deep dive.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how this theme runs throughout his life and work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this practical bent might explain another key concept in Archytas' thought.
Yeah.
His emphasis on logistic.
Right.
Now, logistic isn't just another word for basic arithmetic, right?
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
It encompasses the study of numbers and their relationships, quantities, proportions, ratios.
Okay.
It's the science of how numbers interact and create meaning.
And Archytas believed this logistic was crucial for gaining wisdom, even
Yeah.
more so than geometry.
Yes.
Really?
And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
One interpretation is that Archytas saw logistic as foundational.
Okay.
Certain geometrical proofs, for example,
Okay.
require an understanding of numerical relationships to be complete.
So he's not dismissing geometry,
No.
but rather suggesting that it needs logistic as its foundation.
Exactly.
I'm curious, what was Plato's view on
Oh.
logistic? Did he see it as equally important?
Plato does discuss calculation and measurement in his works,
Okay.
but he doesn't use the term logistics specifically,
Huh.
nor does he elevate it to the same level of importance as Archytas.
That's fascinating. It seems like another point of divergence between them.
Yeah.
But there's another layer to this, right? A more philosophical one?
Okay.
Remember, Archytas,
Yeah.
like the Pythagoreans before him,
Right.
believed that numbers were the key to understanding everything, not just abstract concepts,
Oh, wow.
but the world we experience.
So logistic wasn't just about solving equations. It was about comprehending the very structure of the universe.
Yes.
That's quite a bold claim.
It is.
And he applied this concept broadly
Yeah.
to politics,
Yes.
ethics,
Uh-huh.
even art.
Exactly.
Whoa, numbers are the key to a just society, a morally upright life,
Yeah.
and beautiful art. That's a lot to unpack.
It might sound radical, but that's the essence of his argument.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Even a sculptor, while using geometry to shape their creation,
Right.
relies on specific proportions, ratios,
Yeah.
numerical values
Okay.
to achieve the desired form and beauty.
That's a really thought-provoking point.
Right.
It's like he's saying there's a hidden mathematical code underlying everything we see, hear, and do.
How did this play out in his work on cosmology and his argument for an infinite universe?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that deserves its own exploration. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Archytas. Before we were discussing his concept of logistic, the science of number and proportion, and how he saw it as fundamental to understanding not just mathematics, but the world around us.
Yes, and I'm particularly intrigued by how he applied this concept to his understanding of the cosmos. He's credited with one of the most compelling arguments for an infinite universe, an idea that still sparks debate today.
It's a remarkably elegant argument based on a thought experiment.
Yeah.
Imagine, he says, you reach what you believe to be the outermost edge of the universe.
Okay.
What happens when you extend your hand or staff beyond that point? Wouldn't you simply create a new boundary implying there's always something beyond any supposed limit?
That's such a simple yet profound way to think about it. It challenges our very notion of boundaries and finitude. Did this idea gain widespread acceptance among his contemporaries?
Not necessarily. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, for example,
Right.
argued for a finite cosmos.
Okay.
However, Archytas' argument sparked centuries of debate among philosophers and scientists, from the Stoics to the Epicureans, and even influenced thinkers like Newton.
It's amazing how a single idea can resonate across time and continue to challenge our understanding of the universe.
Hmm.
What other insights did he glean from his exploration of the natural world?
His observations led him to suggest that all things move according to proportion. He believed that different types of motion are defined by different proportions.
Could you elaborate on that? It sounds like a very mathematical way of understanding motion.
He proposed that the proportions governing the movement of a galloping horse, for instance,
Okay.
would be different from those governing the gentle falling of a leaf. Even natural processes like the growth of a plant or the curve of an animal's limb were, according to Archytas, governed by a specific proportion of equality that he associated with curved rather than linear movement.
This idea of a proportion of equality governing natural growth is fascinating. It seems like a very early attempt to quantify and understand the forces that shape the natural world. Did he elaborate on how this proportion works or what it looks like mathematically?
Unfortunately, the surviving texts don't give us a precise mathematical formula for this proportion of equality.
Yeah.
It's likely he was working with a conceptual framework rather than a strict numerical equation.
Right.
However, we can see how this idea connects back to his broader concept of logistic.
Yes, it emphasizes how the relationships between numbers, the ratios and proportions, are just as important, if not more so, than the numbers themselves.
Right.
It's about understanding the underlying principles that create order and structure in the universe.
Exactly.
And it seems like he didn't limit this understanding of proportion to just the natural world. He also applied it to ethics and politics, didn't he?
That's right. Archytas argued that rational calculation, being able to understand and apply proportions, was crucial for achieving fairness and harmony in society. This ability to calculate and reason, he believed, was what prevented greed and helped create a stable social order.
So instead of relying on a strict set of laws or a ruling class, he believed that a society could be guided by a shared understanding of proportion and fairness. It sounds like a very idealistic view of human nature.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember the context of his time.
Right.
Archytas, as you know, was a leader in a democracy. He believed that this capacity for rational calculation was shared by all citizens, regardless of their social standing.
Yeah.
This stands in stark contrast to Plato's vision of a just society ruled by an elite class of philosopher kings.
It's a very different approach.
Yeah.
Instead of relying on a select few who have achieved a higher level of wisdom, Archytas seems to have believed in the potential of all citizens to participate in creating a just society.
Precisely. It was this shared capacity for reason that formed the foundation of his political philosophy. And this emphasis on reason and self-control is also reflected in anecdotes about his personal life. There's a famous story about him refusing to punish his slaves in a moment of anger because he didn't want to act irrationally.
That's remarkable. It suggests a deep commitment to living in accordance with his principles, even in challenging situations.
There's another story about him choosing to write down his curses on a wall rather than shouting them aloud.
Oh, wow.
Again, demonstrating his dedication to controlling his emotions and acting rationally.
These stories paint a picture of man deeply committed to reason and self-mastery. But did this emphasis on reason mean he saw pleasure as something to be avoided?
Interestingly, there's a story about a debate between Archytas and a hedonist named Polyarchus.
Okay.
Polyarchus, who was from Syracuse, argued in favor of pursuing pleasure and satisfying desires.
He sounds like a character who would fit right in with the Epicureans. I'm curious how Archytas, with his focus on reason, responded to this challenge.
He countered with a thought experiment, typical of his approach to philosophy.
Right.
Imagine, he asked, someone experiencing the most intense bodily pleasure imaginable.
Could it?
Would that person, in that moment, be capable of rational thought?
That's a really clever way to frame the argument. It highlights the potential conflict between unbridled pleasure and clear, rational thinking.
Exactly. And this is the core of Archytas's position.
Okay.
He wasn't necessarily against all forms of pleasure. He clearly enjoyed things like playing with children
Yeah.
and valued the pleasures of friendship.
Okay.
But he was suggesting that excessive bodily pleasure could cloud our judgment and hinder our ability to act rationally.
This idea of finding a balance between pleasure and reason is something that many philosophers have grappled with. It makes me wonder how Archytas would view our modern world with its constant distractions and focus on instant gratification.
It's an interesting question and one that we can only speculate on. But before we get too sidetracked by that line of thought, there's another aspect of Archytas's thought that we should explore.
You mean his emphasis on the interconnectedness of knowledge?
Exactly. He wasn't just a mathematician or a politician. He was both and a philosopher and a scientist.
A true polymath. It's inspiring to think about how he saw connections where others saw boundaries.
And this brings us back to that intriguing list of 4 sciences he identified: astronomy, geometry, logistic, and music.
Right.
What's fascinating is that this grouping foreshadows the quadrivium, a core component of liberal arts education in the Middle Ages.
So this ancient Greek thinker was influencing how people learned centuries later.
Eh.
That's incredible.
It speaks to the enduring power of his ideas.
Yeah.
He saw these sciences as interconnected,
Right.
each shedding light on the others,
Yeah.
and contributing to a deeper understanding of the world. And this integrated approach to knowledge continued to resonate throughout history.
It's a reminder that knowledge isn't meant to be compartmentalized, but rather woven together into a tapestry of understanding. It's remarkable how Archytas's ideas, continue to resonate even today. His emphasis on the interconnectedness of knowledge, the importance of proportion and balance, it's all incredibly relevant to the challenges we face in the 21st century.
Yeah, he reminds us that true understanding requires a holistic perspective, a willingness to see the connections between seemingly disparate fields. He was a man ahead of his time in many ways.
Makes me wonder if Archytas were alive today, what would he be like? What insights would he offer to a world grappling with climate change, artificial intelligence, and the complexities of globalization?
That's a fascinating question. Imagine a modern-day Archytas, someone equally adept at navigating the worlds of science, philosophy, and politics.
Yeah.
What challenges would he confront? What solutions might he propose?
It's tempting to romanticize the past, to envision him strolling through the agora, engaging in philosophical debates leading his city to victory. But we have to remember that he was a product of his time, shaped by the social and political realities of ancient Greece.
Exactly. We can't simply plop him into the 21st century and expect him to thrive. It's a thought experiment, but a challenging one. Would his emphasis on rational calculation and proportion still hold weight in a world grappling with such complex problems? Would his vision of a just society based on shared reason translate to our diverse and often polarized world?
These are huge questions, and I honestly don't have the answers. But that's what's so exciting about exploring figures like Archytas. They challenge us to think differently, to re-examine our own assumptions, and to grapple with timeless questions about the nature of knowledge, justice, and the good life.
Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson we can take away from Archytas. He encourages us to embrace a spirit of inquiry, to seek connections, and to never stop questioning. He reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is an ongoing journey, one that requires both intellectual rigor and a willingness to engage with the complexities of the world around us.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Archytas of Tarentum. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired to do some more exploring, some more thinking, and maybe even some more calculating. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those thoughts flowing.